Well, let's disperse the first German myth, that is punctuality. But then again, we have to say it is perfectly customary in Germany to start any lecture or any academic presentation exactly 15 minutes late. So, and it is exactly 7:15, so I'm well within my culture. And I bid you a fond welcome to the German Cultural Center. My name is Wolfgang Krüger. I'm the executive director here of the Goethe-Zentrum, the German Cultural Center. I'd like to welcome a few guests, special guests, who are always very happy to welcome here at our institute. One is, of course, Mr. Lutz Görgens, the designated Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany. Welcome, Lutz. And the other, there you are. The other guest I would like to mention is not only the president of the board of directors of the Alliance Française, but also board member of our organization, the German Cultural Center, who is Mr. Nigel Richardson. Welcome. And last but certainly not least, my esteemed colleague and friend, if I may say, Claude Wegscheider. Also welcome. Judging by the greetings from earlier, I'm almost being tempted to say bonsoir to everybody because there's a bunch of French speakers here, and you're bienvenue à Centre Culturel d'Allemagne. Before we go into tonight's lecture, allow me please to briefly announce a few events that are coming up. One is July the 20th, which is a famous day in German history, and it was the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler on July 20th, 1944, by the officer Count Stauffenberg. We will have a lecture on that occasion on July the 20th. The other one is and you found little leaflets, our upcoming Oktoberfest, which is going to be our annual fundraiser. It's going to be the second one at Atlantic Station, and you can enjoy and celebrate with us German customs, I should rather say, and celebrate with us German-American and therefore American international friendship. Then last but not least, also a wonderful event coming up this July 21st is the annual fundraiser of my friends at the Alliance Française, the Bastille Day, which is held at Puritan Mill, which is down Foundry, yes. But you have some Alliance people here who can give you further information. So having said that, I'd like to briefly welcome our guest speaker for tonight, Teissier-du Cros. That sounds so absolutely not German. You have no idea how curious I am listening to a Scottish, French, American to tell me about my country. And believe you me, I will challenge if I feel necessary. So anyway, now without any further ado, Mr. Teissier-du Cros is a very well-traveled international business consultant who has done for many, many years business consulting in all kinds of countries, including Germany, and has very close ties with Germany. And he suggested this topic and wants to share with you and explain to you his personal connections to Germany as a country, Germans the people, and the German culture. As I said before, I'm delighted to see such a wonderful turnout tonight, and let's see what we can learn about the weird Germans. And please help me in welcoming Monsieur André Teissier-du Cros.
Thank you, Wolfgang. And I want to thank first the Goethe Institute and the Alliance Française for giving me this occasion. And without keeping you waiting any longer, I'm going to activate our presentation of today. And what I'm going to talk about, the picture is good? Yeah. Is how the German flag tells the history of why Germany matters today and the role it has played in the creation of the European Union. Excuse me, I have a technical incident, which is that for some mysterious reason, this is running automatically, which is not what I wanted. Okay.
German efficiency right there.
Exactly. So, first I want to tell you, Americans know very little about Germany, and until the 90s, there was little need to know, whereas Germany is now accepted and respected as the central player and the coach for 500 million people. Since 91, she has pursued, I'm still having a problem here. Let me see, what's going on with my presentation? No, this is okay. So, let me try again. Yes. No, I'm still running into the same problem. So I'm going to do something different. I'm sorry. Oh. Maybe I'll have simply to talk louder. So, since 1991, Germany has pursued jointly with France a foreign policy which makes her highly popular in the world. Today, the Pope is German, so is the European anthem. The euro is managed like the Deutschmark was, which is well. Germany excels in some 70% of all industrial technologies and know-hows which Europe is exporting, which is a lot. While for the first time, world exchanges in euros exceed world exchanges in dollars. Is the micro working? No, it's not. All right, I'll try to talk louder. Why, first of all, am I speaking myself about Germany? After all, I am born French and British. I'm a US citizen. I have family connections in Holland and Switzerland, but not in Germany. Well, I was born before the war, and my first experience face-to-face with a German was in early 1944 in Paris. I was walking home. I was, of course, a small kid, and I was addressed in French by a German Wehrmacht officer who asked me when I was born, how old I was, which I told him, and when was my birthday, which I told him. And then he gave me a package of sausage and bread, and he told me, I have in Germany a little boy who is practically your age and looks very much like you. I hope he doesn't look like me today. And I'm giving you this so that you remember that I would like, after the war, that you and my son could be friends. This, of course, was a very dirty trick to play on me, because it meant every time I would meet a German my age, I would have to remember the bread and the sausages. However, when I was a kid, of course, the subject of Germany in France was, shall we say, highly controversial. And it was a subject on which my mother, my British mother, and my French father did agree. My British mother had lived in Berlin and Vienna before the war, and her experience of the war got her severely anti-German. My father had been fighting in 1940, then he had been a POW, then a civil servant doing work for the French underground, and then again drafted in 1944 to finish the war. But with all this, his opinions of the German were on the contrary very objective and moderate. So that one day I asked my father finally, can you tell me what is the bottom line about this? What kind of people the Germans are? And he told me, the Germans are people like us. What happened to the Germans with Nazism came within an inch of happening to the French. And he told me the story of February 6, 1934, the attempted fascist coup d'etat in Paris, which was stopped at the last minute by the French police, and which would have been the occasion for France to go the fascist way, like most of continental Europe. Then I forgot about Germany for a certain time until, when I was a young trainee engineer, I did a period in Alsace in a machinery business where the head design engineer was one of the 100,000 Germans who became French after 45. His name was Kurt Rausch, and he was a very experienced engineer. Incidentally, 40,000 French in 1945 who happened to be in Germany for various reasons decided to stay there too. In most cases there was a woman involved. But not for Kurt Rausch. He stayed with his German wife and his German kids. And I remember a few things that struck me about him. First, he was taking very seriously the question of training a trainee, which is not always common in business. Second, I remember him saying, either you do it right or you don't do it at all, which is something I heard in Germany later. But he also said, it applies to being French. You have the chance to be in a democracy and a republic, you have better take advantage of it and take your institutions seriously. He also told me the devil is in the details. Then I remember about Karl. I don't remember his last name. He was an older man living in France, French citizen, with whom I was teaming because the consulting firm I was working for had sometimes work to do in Germany because of the growing exchanges between the French and the German industry. He took me to East Germany in 1979, which was quite an experience. I remember meeting with old Germans there, telling me things here were better under Hitler. And looking at what was happening around, maybe I could understand their point of view. I was involved at the time about manufacturing camembert with German machines. You might not know it, but camembert is mass-produced in France, but the technology was designed in Germany especially for one French manufacturer and then was sold elsewhere. Working on the project of French electromagnetic locks for BMW, the invention came from France. The first application outside France was BMW. Then American exhaust joints for Volkswagen. It was at the time when the Chrysler Horizon car was manufactured in France, equipped with a Volkswagen engine and exported to the US. And there were problems matching the engine with the old exhaust system. And also one assignment which I did in which a German company, Hoechst, developed acetal resin jacks, in other words, high-resistance plastics, for the Citroën hydropneumatic suspension. All these were occasions to work with German people. And then in 1980-83, I gave a series of seminars in Europe through a program in which we were receiving executives from several European countries. And the topic of my seminars were business strategy applied to multiple industries. And I noticed that more than once, German executives attending the seminar were telling me, what you said may be true, but it doesn't apply to our industry, in which obviously you have no experience, which in the beginning I thought a bit shocking. So I went on to talk with them, and what they were telling me was, what is dangerous in this kind of approach that you're exposing is that trying to apply standard procedures and formulas to management of all kinds of businesses make you forget the distinction between being profitable and being competitive. And what they essentially meant was, you can be profitable for 1 year, but if you want to be safely profitable in the long-term future, you have to be competitive, which is a question of human resources, of skills, of procedures, and of teamwork. And you cannot develop that if you have great strategic schemes, such as mergers and acquisitions, which are permanently disturbing the human resources. Then in the period from 1983, when I emigrated to the US, to this day, I had one assignment with a German company called Vesumat in Augsburg, which led to the acquisition of one of their competitors in Canada, and I had an assignment to turn around the business, which was an occasion to interface between the German management and Canadians, with the general prejudice on the German side that Canada was an underdeveloped country. Then I was involved in a very interesting case that didn't last very long. It was a dispute between a French and a German company that turned into a lawsuit. What had happened was that in Köln, a brilliant German engineer, Dr. Nemitz, had invented in the 60s a new process to manufacture sandwich panels. And he had sold his business, which had about 12 plants at the time, to a French steel company called Solac. And then, having sold his business, he had a heart attack and died in his office, leaving a widow and a daughter. And at that time, Solac discovered that there had been some funny book cooking in the Greek subsidiary of the company, and that the due diligence was fraudulent. So they sued. And my goal at the time was to try to settle the dispute out of courts and get the Germans out of lawyers and all the consequences. Another experience was with a German trainee in my company in Atlanta, Dirk Reichelt, who came as a young marketing student. Today he is in his 40s. We have remained good friends. He lives in Essen with a wife and 2 kids. And I remember the strange experience with him of talking to him about German history. I was struck by the fact that he didn't know much about his country, his history, and had lots of questions about it. And today I have an excellent relationship with a German client in Frankfurt. They are in mechanical components. I'm dealing with a Mr. Detlef Zimmerling, who is a man a bit younger than me and who told me fascinating stories about his childhood in East Germany and the living conditions his parents had when they emigrated to the West, because they passed the Iron Curtain very early in the 60s. Now, the question about Germany that anyone who is non-German and who is an economist or a businessman will ask is, how do they do it? Germany has an incredibly positive trade balance, despite an escalating euro and highest salaries costs. Germany is an industrial powerhouse exporting worldwide products outsourced throughout Europe. But Germany at the same time is at the forefront of environment protection. They are the biggest machinery producer in the world together with the US. But they export much, much more, and they are gaining ground despite a weak dollar. Germany has an experience in managing inflation that was eventually transferred to Europe and imitated worldwide. Germany has an education system which has been copied all around the world. We'll come back to that. And a knack at originating world standards, ISO standards, patent laws, etc. In a nutshell, the Germans are competitive, really competitive. How did the French find out? Remember, after all, I was born in France. Well, we learn in French history lessons that the first culture shock was the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71. The Prussian soldiers struck the French for one detail. 3/4 of them knew how to read and write and had an elementary education. 3/4 of the French soldiers were analphabets at the time. The second thing that some of them noticed that the Prussians were beginning to talk about an innovation in their country called social security, which was strangely intriguing the French. Then, much later, France was in a situation of rebuilding its economy after 1945, at a time when the French economy was really in very poor condition, extremely backward compared to other developed countries. And at the time, under the auspices of the French government, Ministry of Industry, and Commissariat of the 5-year plan, France evolved between the German and the American model. And generally the consensus was, can we combine American strategic planning and financial mobility with German competitiveness based on skills, procedures and standards, and create at the same time new markets, meaning innovate. How? Well, I was the reporter of a national committee in France which operated from 1967 to 1972, gathering about 50 experts of industry, university and government. And the committee made a discovery. The American-style interplay between business, university and venture capital, which was then exemplified in Boston by the ancestor of the research parks, the Route 128, was flourishing in Germany before 1914 and explained in part German innovation and competitiveness combined. But where did itself come from? Well, we are going now to follow step by step a time span of 200 years, which will show you growing German competitiveness with progress of the federal flag of today. You've got to go back 200 years ago and understand at the time that there was no country called Germany. You had a hodgepodge of states and principalities, some big one and some very small, which shared a common language and loose relationship, but did not constitute a nation. Napoleon had caused a tremendous shock, abolishing the Holy Roman German Empire, which existed since 962. And the question was, what will replace it? Will German-speaking Europe be united one day was, of course, on the agenda. Some Germans were talking about a democratic confederation. Would it be with or without Prussia? With or without Austria? Prussia itself was discussing about reforming the country through the rule of law or going back to an authoritarian monarchy. If you look at the map of the German-speaking nations at the time, you can see what first constituted in 1815 the Deutscher Bund, the German Confederation, represented here in blue, which is Prussia, and grey, which are the other countries, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire in yellow. And this confederation was created in 1815, and in 1834 the creation of the Zollverein, in other words the customs union, creating a free trade zone, made of that whole territory an ancestor of the common market. German-speaking countries did not yet agree about where they wanted to go, but they were gaining the advantages of free trade, which favors competitiveness. The flag first appeared in 1813. It was the flag of the Lützow volunteers in the Napoleonic War. It appeared again in 1832, evoking German unity at the Hamburg Festival. In 1848, the March Revolution was following the Third French Revolution and was the occasion for it to become the official flag of the German Confederation, gathering 39 states. But then, United Germany in 1871 was built and organized around Prussia, and Bismarck, the Chancellor, was invited to give his opinion about what should be the future German flag. And he said, any flag but the black, red and gold. For him, it smelled too much of democracy. The flag came back in 1919 with the Republic of Weimar, was abolished by the Nazis in 1933, until it came back in 1949. While all this was happening, going back 200 years ago, the political disputes between the countries were slowly evolving. France's population was stagnating, but the population of the German Confederation and later German Empire exploded. Within the 1871 borders, You had 22 million people in 1810, 67 million in 1913, and the economy exploded too. And yet, many Germans had to emigrate, first to America. Why this growing prosperity? Was it German work ethics? Certainly. German thrift? Of course. German honesty? Certainly too. But these would be helpless without free enterprise, free trade through the Zollverein, private property, and education. You will recognize here the same conditions that after 45 we tried to create in Europe with the common market. In 19th century America, where you had a regular flow of immigrants from Europe, what was the difference between a German and an Irish immigrant? The same as between a Prussian and a French soldier. An Irish landing in New York would grab the first passers-by and say, "Hey, do you know John O'Connor? Can't miss him, you know, big guy, red hair, never says no to a beer." The German landing in New York, probably with a letter in his hand, would say, "Please, sir, how do I get to the railroad station to go to St. Louis?" "Well, I can show you that," the American would say, "but you know where you're going to go in St. Louis?" "Oh, yes, I have a letter from my cousin here giving me directions. He has already bought the land for me. We are going to develop it together." Education was the difference. In the American landscape, every farm building or barn with the double slanted roof, as you see in this photograph, reminds you that the German immigrants were coming with their own skills, their own know-how, and their own way to do things. And it has stayed in the landscape. Well, to explain how it came to be, I have to introduce a very important man, although when he was alive he didn't know how important he was. Wilhelm von Humboldt, philosopher, educator, civil servant, and diplomat in Prussia. As a philosopher, he wrote On the Limits of State Action in 1810, which book influenced John Stuart Mill's essay on liberty. Humboldt was a Republican in the true sense of the word. In other words, he was explaining why the state could not manage everything and why, in fact, it was better to let individual freedom play freely and limit, therefore, the responsibilities of the state to the common good, the public affairs, in other words, the res publica in the Roman sense, the republic. Humboldt, as a minister of education, created practically the schooling system in Prussia from very little. Remember that before 1800, schooling in Europe was very, very underdeveloped. Very few people had access to any kind of education. With him, education started being for everyone, and he notably created the Technische Hochschule system, which is the ancestor of the institutes of technology of the world, beginning with Germany and later Europe. For the French, who were intrigued about how liaison between university and industry started, they considered that it was the technical Hochschule which spontaneously created the right conditions in Germany, and therefore the right conditions of later the industrial innovation process. Humboldt was a scientist, and for instance his research on language structure, of which he was a specialist, at the end of his career he was studying Javanese, originated what is called today the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which says that there is a systematic relationship between the grammatical categories of a language that a person speaks and how that person understands the world and behaves in it. If you want, for a layman, the language you speak conditions your prejudices, which comes naturally to the mind today, but at the time was a completely new concept. Humboldt considered himself a failure because he couldn't prevent, as he was part of government, the drift of the Prussian state back to an authoritarian rule away from the republican rule of law, so that he retired from public life in 1819, little knowing the momentous influence of his legacy. In 1966, after the rest of Europe, the United States and the UK, French universities started serious reforms applying Humboldt's concepts. Better late than never. So what did Humboldt bring to education? Before Humboldt, university, the world of science and theoretical knowledge, lived separated from the world of practice, of industry, technology, and commerce. Remember a hint, in the Middle Ages, science was a monopoly of the church. After Humboldt, the Institute of Technology trained students to permanently reconcile theory with practice and to apply knowledge to real-life industry. The German engineer is trained in trusting scientific modeling. Industry and university begin working hand in hand, but Humboldt didn't think of it because there wasn't much industry in his days. He did not foresee that the Prussian state, remaining authoritarian, would nevertheless want education for all, and that the rest of Germany would follow. He did not foresee that German engineers and businessmen, applying this newly acquired education to Germany's natural resources, coal and iron ore, would develop an extremely powerful steel industry. Steel would make machines and also cannons. And then from coal, plus the new science of organic chemistry, would develop chemical synthesis of all kinds of compounds, from dyes and pigments, flavors, drugs, think of Bayer and aspirin, which was the first breakthrough, ethylene and other gases, explosives, and later polymers, that is to say, plastics. In 1910, here is a very striking example of superior German metallurgical technology. The World War I Zeppelin rigid airships used as bombers over England were made possible by duralumin, a secret alloy of aluminum, copper, manganese, magnesium, and tungsten invented by Alfred Wilms. During World War I, no one in the UK or France succeeded to retro-engineer the alloy. The license became available in 1920, and to this day, all aircraft are made of derivatives of Wilms' initial invention. Another example is the adventure of Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz beginning in 1885, learning to combine several disciplines. If you combine mechanical engineering, thermodynamics, metallurgy, electrical engineering, and hydrocarbon chemistry, you get the first practical gasoline-fired automobile. But an interesting question is, once you have done that, why did you call it Mercedes? Well, here is a story. At the turn of the century, Daimler-Benz, still a small venture, wanted very much to export their cars to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was a huge and prosperous market. And they had found a very prosperous businessman, a Czech, by the name of Jelinek, who was ready to take a big risk on promoting their cars, promoting racing with their cars. But he said, the name Daimler-Benz is all wrong. You can't export cars with a name like that. Why don't you take a nice international name that everyone can relate to? Take my daughter, Mercedes. Der Kunde hat immer Recht. That's not German. The customer is always right. Le client a toujours raison. And the name of Mercedes stuck, of course, to this day. Now, Humboldt did not foresee that by 1914, Germany would become the most powerful and advanced industrial base in the world, and that German science and technology would become the world reference. And then, 1914, hell broke loose. Why? Well, to understand why, again, we have to go back 200 years ago. At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the questions on the military front were this. Prussia, what can we learn from these wars? France remained the military heavyweight, but Russia wants to expand. Italy wants unity and freedom from Austria. The Ottoman Empire is generally hostile. But all these people agree on one thing at the time. War pays. Waging war against another country means putting together a relatively small army, suffering maybe a loss of a few thousand soldiers to conquer a rich province and raise tax. The general prejudice at the time, therefore, that war is an instrument like any other to achieve one's ends. Hasn't it always been true? Prussia was a small country surrounded by big powers without natural protection. It had a small population and a brilliant military tradition already. However, it was severely defeated by Napoleon in 1806. Same was Austria and same was Russia. Something had to be done about it, and when German people say that, they are going to be very thorough, and you can be sure that they will do something. The story is told by an American military historian, Colonel Trevor Dupuy, by a book published in 1970 called A Genius for War, a challenging explanation of why, for over a century, Germany produced the world's best armies. How did he come to do his research? Well, he was at the end of the war in a position to analyze war casualties in the different armies. Example, in 1939, Germany invades Poland. 5 Polish casualties for 1 German. 1940, Germany invades France. 4 French casualties per German. 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. 10 Russian casualties per German. In 1942, October, Germany having been victorious until now on all fronts, El Alamein is the first Allied victory. Montgomery had 220,000 troops and 1,100 tanks, fighting Rommel with 80,000 troops, 380 tanks, running short of supplies. The battle lasted 15 days, 3 Allied casualties per German. And yet Rommel retreats in good order, and a bit later beats the hell out of a US army in Tunisia at the Kasserine Pass. In 1944-45, at the end, the Battle of the Bulge, Germans are exhausted, outnumbered, short of all supplies, facing Allied air superiority. Still 1.3 Allied casualties per German. Well, according to Dupuy, it all began in 1806 when 5 brilliant Prussian minds decided to put their heads together and reinvent warfare. They were led by Gerhard von Scharnhorst, and the intellectual and theoretician of the team was Clausewitz, who became famous for his theories on warfare. And they were assisted by 3 very experienced commanding officers, Gneisenau, Boyen, and Grollmann, who were the implementers of the 2 others' ideas. What kind of men were those Prussian aristocrats? Of course, they were fierce patriots. They were sincere and severe Christian Protestants, strongly prejudiced, knowing that God was on their side in battle as in the rest. They considered the military career as the highest and noblest possible. They had a high sense of honor, strong characters. They were physically in top shape. They were truly elite people. So, studying Napoleon, they found the way to do better and different. Napoleon was saying, war as an art is all in implementation. Only experience and genius can bring a commanding officer to turn the chance of battle at his advantage. Any theory becomes at once obsolete once the battle has begun. Each officer and NCO in the battle must know what to improvise when isolated and under threat. Also, Napoleon had smaller armies, but many, many more cannons. They were better cannons. They were the same used at Yorktown, by the way. And he was an artillery officer by education, so he knew how to use them. The Prussian team decided to use Kriegsspiel, the war game, as a tool to quickly train future commanding officers in front of fictitious situations. Train them quickly, drill them on many situations, and all this with little time and low cost. They created a permanent German general staff which was following the career of every officer, coaching them and training them in order to produce one way or the other 4 or 5 Napoleons per generation. And they did that. They were training all officers how to improvise a plan B at all times. And they were always ahead in weaponry weight, quantity, and technology, making sure that logistics and training would follow. The result was a smashing success throughout the 19th century. It began in 1815 with Waterloo, where Blücher very cleverly outflanked Grouchy and came to the rescue of Wellington just in time. In 1863, it was unnoticed yet at the Diebold victory against Denmark. In 1866, it became extremely visible at the victory of Sadowa against Austria, a momentous victory between two colossal armies. 1871, Sedan was the final victory against France. And from then on, Germany being united, Prussia became the military leader in the new Europe. In 1914-18, it came within an inch. Twice, Germany came close to a decisive victory, in August 14 and in June 18. And in between, except the Western Front, the Germans were victorious on all fronts. In 39-42, you could say that they never were better. Problem being that they were really serving the wrong statesman and the wrong policy. Now, World War I, finally, whose fault was it? Why did it ever start? It was, by today's standard, a monument of stupidity. It all began because Austria declared war to Serbia for the same reasons the US declared war to Afghanistan and Iraq, to stop international terrorism coming from a country with violent expansionist ambitions. By those standards, Austria was right. But security of Serbia was guaranteed by Russia. Tsar Nicholas, therefore, declares war to Austria. Germany was allied to Austria and therefore declares war to Russia. France and the UK had an alliance with Russia and declared war to Germany and Austria. Whose fault was it? Everybody. It was not especially Germany's fault. In 1919, the Versailles Treaty ends the war. Georges Clemenceau, the French president, and Woodrow Wilson agree to declare Germany is the culprit. Germany will pay for this war. Lloyd George had reservations, but he follows. The war debts imposed on Germany are sky high. The post-war economy after the war is very depressed. The consequences, therefore, are dramatic for the Germans. You have here a poster which was on the walls everywhere in Germany in the 20s about war debts, saying, you will all slave until the third generation to pay these debts. The result was social unrest, hyperinflation, and in 1922, Walter Rathenau, the Chancellor, a very brilliant man, is murdered by Nazi demonstrators. I love this photograph showing a demonstration of protest against his murder. You see by the amplitude of the crowd that the Republic and democracy were already popular in Germany. Notice the flag, it's black and white, but it is the black, red and gold flag of the Republic. Notice the poster here, never more war, a pacifist demonstration. 1923-24, Germany cannot pay war debts. The French army occupies Rhineland. France at the time triggered hate and missed a great opportunity. The small Nazi party gains ground. Socialists and communists gain ground too, and they oppose Nazism, as shown this poster in which the socialist propaganda states the Third Reich will not pass. From 1919 to 32, the Nazi vote will never exceed 1/3. Another third of the Germans vote for the Marxist left. 1/3 is faithful to democracy and freedom, but deeply divided. In November 32, at the peak of world depression, Germany has 6 million unemployed in a tragic situation, a ruined middle class. Hindenburg, the president, appoints Adolf Hitler as chancellor as a measure of expediency. A coup d'etat, facilitated by 3 years of government by decree, under Chancellor Brüning and von Papen, brings Hitler to absolute power in January 33. An incredibly efficient totalitarian police state is born, managed by criminals and xenophobic fanatics. In 1934, we have the last general elections under Nazi rule. The most intensive propaganda program is organized. Many elections are public. One cannot hide one's votes. Voting conditions are rigged in many cities. Threat and intimidation gestures are expressed everywhere. And yet the Nazi vote reaches only 49%. The Nazis were never a majority in Germany. However, you have to consider that all over continental Europe in the 30s, 3 major political factions were opposing democracy and capitalism, Anglo-Saxon style. You had the Marxists, who were against individual rights and considering the purpose of life as the construction of a classless society through abolition of private property. Sorry, that is something I didn't expect. Those things are really infuriating. Okay. The Church, the Catholic Church, was opposed to democratic permissiveness and self-gratification. Purpose of life is to worship God through an altruistic behavior to achieve salvations of one's soul. The fascists were saying no to democracy and limited government. The purpose of life is to serve the enlightened nation state which embodies and protects our sacred ethnic identity. Du bist nichts, dein Volk ist alle, Dr. Goebbels. You are nothing if you are not a German first. In 1945, the 3 factions have been proven wrong. Their beliefs have led 4 major continental countries down to the ground. And in 45-50, 2 new political powers emerge in Europe. The Christian Democrats, through which the Catholic Church reconciles with democracy, and the Social Democrats, in which the Marxists do the same. Where did they come from? They came from resistance movements, including in Germany and Italy, from POW camps like François Mitterrand, from jails like Adenauer, from overseas like de Gaulle, Willy Brandt or Jean Monnet, from concentration camps like Simone Weil. And a deep soul-searching takes place within the Catholic Church. They all agree now about drawing the lessons from fascists and communism, and the conclusion is never again. How was it possible? Both ideologies captured absolute power thanks to an army of unemployed lower and middle-class people ruined by hyperinflation. Both used power to bring contempt for human dignity down to the most ludicrous levels. A new consensus emerged on republican rule of law, limited government, democratic rule, but also strong social protection, strong currency. those two last points at any cost to this day, because the human person is sacred and human dignity is not negotiable. In 1949, birth of the Federal Republic of Germany, Konrad Adenauer, a political giant, is the first chancellor. Germany officially turns her back to any military ambition. A colossal political undertaking is about to begin. Adenauer will stay as head of government until 1963. Jean Monnet, who was the mastermind of the European Union, brings Christian Democrats and Social Democrats in France, Germany, Italy, Holland, and Belgium together to negotiate the coal and steel pool in 1950, which will become the common market. Britain fights the project from the beginning. Holland is lukewarm. Italy is enthusiastic. Belgium is constructive. France and Germany are pushing, pushing, and pushing. Adenauer publicly proposes uniting Germany in France and France for a start. And the first meeting between Adenauer and Jean Monnet, representing Robert Schuman, the French Prime Minister, takes place in May 1950. We have here a very moving picture of Jean Monnet's handwritten notes during that meeting. He scribbled down peace, Europe, France and Germany, German unity, French-German unity not excluded. During that explanation, what was said was concluding what was called a moral pact, which is an essential root of reconciliation and union of Europeans. 1959, the Fifth Republic does to France what the Federal Republic did to Germany: stable institutions guaranteeing prosperity. De Gaulle is the new president. Adenauer asks to meet him. De Gaulle invites Adenauer at his home in Colombey. Adenauer proves that he is truly a great statesman. He manages to make de Gaulle change his mind about a possible European community leading to a union. However, they still disagreed about something, even though they became close friends. De Gaulle would say, "Why don't you accept to start French-German unity with common foreign policy and common defense? France is prepared to share nuclear armaments with Germany without second trigger if it is for joint independence from both the United States and the Soviet Union." Adenauer answers, "France and Germany speaking with one voice independently from America, that's impossible as long as the Soviet Union exists and Germany is divided. I guess it will take 2 generations." 2003, Adenauer was proven right on the occasion of the crisis around Iraq. Now, Europeans accept democracy and free enterprise, but with a grain of salt. Yes to free enterprise, but with a new trinity running a business on the German model. Labor unions representing the employees, stockholders represented by a board, and the enterprise itself represented by management. The new concept that the enterprise is a moral entity emerges at the time. The employee should never be treated as a variable cost, a mere hired hand. No more gross margin in the accounts. Maurice Lauré reforms the French chart of accounts, introduces the added value and aggregates salary cost. The enterprise should respect employees' rights created by their loyalty and dedication to the firm. This way, the firm protects major intangibles, skills and experience nurtured by teamwork. Here, Germany and Italy are leading. This protection does not conflict with competitiveness if the strategy is right. Here, France is leading. Emphasis is made on strategic planning, aiming at avoiding head-on competition and favoring harmonious growth, no business downturns. This conflicts with US-style antitrust jurisprudence, which is a problem unsolved to this day. Investments, should they be private or led by the state? It depends if we are talking short terms, 5 to 10 years, or long term, 15 to 30 years. There is a consensus on a separation. The American model of rule by the sole stock market is criticized, not for us, Europeans say. I illustrate it by the excellent front page of Fortune magazine in 2003, which was exposing at a grand scale the financial scandals around stock optionism led by Enron. Recently, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, reminded Germany is not a capitalist country. The French and all the others agree on that. So, has the European model failed? Yes, says The Economist. Yes, says the Wall Street Journal. Maybe. The great criticism in Anglo-Saxon business media is the Europeans are paying too high tax. German tax pressure is 45% of GDP. The French, 50%. The Swedish, 59%. The US and Japan, only 31%. However, remember that tax pressure includes social benefits, and social benefits are only a transfer of funds. Also remember that value-added tax, which is non-existent in the US, is the biggest contribution to government expenditure. And value-added tax is a virtuous tax because you're not compelled to pay it. You pay it only when you consume. You have the choice of thrift and investment, which explains why the savings rates in Europe are so high. I wouldn't say compared with the US, because today the savings rates in the US are negative. The Americans work 50% more hours per year than the French and more than most Europeans. Gross domestic product per hour, according to a study of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve in 2003, if you take 100 as the US standard, Germany is 99, France is 110, Italy is 90, and the two countries which are not part of United Europe, the UK 76, Japan 74. In other words, for mysterious reasons, the Europeans work little, but when they work, they do work, and they are productive. Also, Europeans live older. You might say it's because they work less. It's not the sole reason. Western European life expectancy is longer than the US, but 1.5 to 2 years. So aren't there real problems in Europe? Yes, there are. Demography is one. The birth rate is too low, and here it is especially the case in Germany. I would expect that in the near future the German government will take steps to re-encourage the birth rate. And progress in implementing a true European foreign policy is also too slow, so that Europe doesn't react fast enough in front of international crisis. These questions, therefore, remain to debate. I have prepared my own conclusion to this presentation, but before I make it, that conclusion, which is what are the lessons we can draw from Germany, I would like first to invite your questions. So any questions is now welcome before my conclusion. If there are no questions, I will conclude that you all agree with me, which would be somewhat surprising. Who was an old German Democrat proposing a confederation leading to a federation was only following what had been German history since 1800. This is why I say that the German Confederation and the Zollverein were examples that the Germans had already lived, and for them a common market leading to unity was not something that new. However, you will notice that since 1949 the consensus remained at least between 6 European countries that European community should lead to a federative Europe and therefore a political union. Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg. Among those 6, I would consider that you have a hard core of 4 countries which are the same without Italy and Holland. And today what I think is talked about is that at some time in the future you could have a gradual abandonment of sovereignty between these 4 countries to begin with, other countries being later invited to join. I would say that regarding France and Germany, we have, by steps, we have always evolved in that direction. You will notice that the 2 policies of the 2 countries have been more and more coordinated, whether it was initially Adenauer and de Gaulle, then there was a gap with Pompidou, but again Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt pushed in the right direction. After Giscard, we had François Mitterrand and a lull until he found a common language with Helmut Kohl. After that, we saw the same thing happening with a further step forward between Jacques Chirac and Gerhard Schröder. And if you look at the last cover of Le Point, I think that Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy are moving very, very fast in the same direction. So my impression is that it's a long-term trend which statesmen are following according to the old rule, these events are beyond us, let's pretend we inspire them, which is an old political principle. So, however, it will happen on the occasion, I think, of a crisis, and therefore it may wait for another generation. Lots of questions.
Any comment on the rate of unemployment in Europe?
Okay. Unemployment is higher in Europe than in the United States. And every European country recognizes this as a problem. Here, I would say that France is the one where the problem is the highest, even though unemployment level is at its lowest for 25 years. So that very slowly they are moving in the right direction. Unemployment combined with high tax pressure are a sort of price to pay for the level of social protection that Europeans wish. That social protection is generally criticized in the US. However, I wanted to explain today why it constitutes for the Europeans something which is not negotiable. We have to solve the problems while even adapting it, but maintaining it. I think I had another. Yes, sir.
How do you see the rejection of a European constitution as far as hindering the trend towards a unified Europe?
I am a very suspicious character, you see, because I have double citizenship, US and French, and therefore I vote in both countries. And I'll make a confession to you. I voted against, and not because I'm anti-European. I will not vote for a constitution of 250 pages. The Oath of Schwyz, which founded the Swiss Confederation, takes 20 lines. Magna Carta is a bit longer, about 2 pages. The US Constitution takes a good 8 pages in its first version. But 250 pages, no. We have to agree on something shorter, sticking to basic principles, and I think that this is what is going to come out of the project of a structural treaty, which now are on the agenda, beginning with France and Holland, who voted no in the previous version. I hope I answered the best question. I had another question somewhere. Yes, sir.
In your presentation, there was one important item missing. After World War II, the Marshall Plan.
Yes. You are absolutely right. The Marshall Plan has been a major factor in reconstruction in Europe, which facilitated the move towards the community. It was exactly the reverse situation of the Versailles Treaty. From that point of view, you could say the Allied had learned the lesson from the Versailles Treaty and had said, we have to help Germany and the whole of Europe in its reconstruction in order to create the conditions of peace and prosperity which represent the security for the whole world. So definitely, yes, the Marshall Plan was a remarkable and bold move. I absolutely agree. Nadia, I'm sure it's going to be a difficult question.
The slide that you have on GDP,
Gross domestic product.
shows that France has the highest index, 110.
Yes.
There's another slide that you have that describes the wonderful qualities that the German people have. Work ethic, discipline. If I had to summarize, I would say the German is very competitive.
I said that, yes.
Now, how do you explain that France has a higher index than the German people? If you had one word that explained the difference between the French and the other countries, what would that be?
Well, I will confess to you that it's a bit mysterious. However, my practice of the French administration tells me this. In all countries, civil service is considered as, a bunch of freeloaders, who have job security and have plenty of time to play cards instead of working. The French civil service works hard, is highly productive, and very well equipped. And the French civil service represents a quarter of the active population. I would say, therefore, that the French have made an effort in organization of government work, which is proving its efficiency today. But the same effort is followed in other European countries, and from that point of view, Europe is definitely ahead of the United States. That's the best I can answer to you. Leonard.
One of the problems that Europe has, and I've been doing since you and I became good friends and we discussed this on many occasions, one of the problems that Europe has is the Europeans are not reproducing themselves enough to hold the demographics.
Correct.
You know, I've read many, many books on the coming Muslim problems, and I've asked you on several occasions, we've debated and whatnot, but what can the German government and the French government and the European Union do to change the demographics?
Okay. First of all, here, the two countries who have the highest birth rate in Europe are France and Ireland, closely followed by the Netherlands. In France, it comes from an old policy favoring birth rate through helping the mothers, example, widespread availability of kindergartens, helping married couple tax-wise, in other words, getting doles per kid you have to bring up, and also a general attitude which has changed in France since World War II, which was generally pro-child, which did not exist before the war. Germany is in the worst situation, and perhaps somebody from Germany here would have an occasion to say how they are going to solve the problem. But coming back to the Muslim situation, you have a few million Muslims in Germany, in France, in England, and similar figures in other countries. In a country like France, the Muslim population has been around for a very long time. And in those three countries, assimilation of Muslim immigrants has been widely successful, while leaving a small minority of troublemakers, in which you have a tiny minority who is tempted by Osama bin Laden and his followers. I personally see that problem evolving exactly the way the Irish problem evolved in the United States in the 19th century, or the Mexican problem is evolving today in the United States. There is a very active effort which is done for assimilation and for educating the Muslim, making them understand that if they want to become German, French, or British, well, the constitution of the country and the law of the country has priority on any religious belief. However, in France, where there is a Muslim council precisely to debate all these questions, conclusions so far have been that there is no contradiction between the Quran and the French constitution. And the same applies to Germany. So I think that it is a problem, like every problem of assimilation. It has to succeed, because the fact is that this immigration, precisely, is beefing up the birth rate. So I would be optimistic about it. Before I take the next question, I'm surprised that no German voice has expressed herself to criticize my controversial view about German history. But let's deal with a question.
Briefly comment on the birth rate, which is challenge the German president here. I firmly believe that no government, however able, can change a societal approach towards having a certain propensity to have more children. I'm a father of 4, so you can't blame me.
No.
I tell you, I've been asked when the 4th child arrived, are you going to be, are you moving to the margin of society? It's, you don't gain esteem in Central Europe. I'm glad to hear that things are better in France, but their birth rate isn't that extraordinary either.
No.
In Central Europe, even in Italy, where we had all
Yes.
these bambinis in the 50s and 60s, the birth rate has dropped terribly.
Dramatically.
So wealth and well-being, a certain laziness which comes with it, have taken hold in Central European society. And certainly what you suggested, about the kindergartens, tax incentives, that's very good. And the German government is very eager to do it, does it. But I think it will take at least a generation, probably as I know suggested too, on another problem, it will take at least one generation to considerably change the birth. And I also agree with what you said. We cannot have a low birth rate and prohibit immigration
Yes.
and grow the economy. We can't have growth
Yes.
with a stagnant birth rate and without immigration.
I think here we all agree. Thank you. I'm glad of these questions. Please, ma'am.
When I was a student in Germany in the mid-70s for the Studies Abroad program, and we went to Berlin, and at the time Berlin was having this was a huge problem in Berlin because it was in the middle of the DDR, and nobody wanted to stay there. Everybody wanted to
Yes,
leave
of course.
because their career path was limited because nobody kept their headquarters there because they were in the middle, the Russian tanks were pointed at them and things like that. And they had things like tax benefits if you had more children, and they sent buses around trying to tell people,
Yes.
well, they have more jobs than they had people. And I was just curious if any of that ever worked to bring in more people.
I can give you a very brief, but very fundamental answer. It's good to have kindergarten, and it's good to have tax advantages. It's also good, more generally, to focus on the mother and find a way to encourage her and help her and give her recognition. But the best thing to do is to bring hope to the people. There is a universal law that if hope is positive, birth rate follows. It's been observed everywhere, including in America. I had some other questions. Please go ahead.
I was going to ask you about immigration. Now I'm inspired to respond to that opinion. As a woman in her late 20s thinking about that and going to work,
Do you mean that you think immigration creates a problem for work availability?
Oh, that's a different question.
Okay, I'm sorry, in that case...
No, I was going to ask you about immigration, but going back to that, the gentleman commented on the Muslim issue in Europe, but I thought about the recent transformation of mobility. For example, like I'm a citizen of Ireland, I could go work in France, even Switzerland now that's not a member of the EU. What do you think is, how does that kind of confound with this issue of, I guess, nationalism in France and Germany, and then the movement of labor? Do you think that that's going to have any effect on the policies upcoming, like a stress in them?
I will try to tell you what I tell to most young people anywhere in the world asking me that kind of question, because it is a widespread feeling when you are young, the fear that you will not find a way to act, earn a living, and do something meaningful in our society. I learned about the problem from my own children, grandchildren, and grandnephews in France and in England. And what I tell them when they ask me the question is this: forget about statistics about unemployment. Forget about what is it that you should learn in order to be sure to find a job. Ask yourself, what is it that you would really like to do because it fits with your skills and your gifts? And then work on it in order to be excellent. And you will see then that you will always find work, but not always in the way you were expecting. And very often you'll have to move around to find that job. And I think that's a universal answer to a universal problem. Everybody is afraid of finding a job tomorrow. I think, yes, ma'am, you had it.
Well, I know in the U.S., there's been a move for women to wait longer to get married, to have children, wait later in life than it used to be. Is that hold true in the European countries?
Yes. Yes. Europeans have a tendency, when they are young and married, to wait to have children, and generally I would say they are waiting a bit too long, because it's always harder and more tiring to bring up children later in life. I agree with you. Yes, sir.
I was interested in your analogy between the causes of World War I and the Iraq War, in that both were responses to international terrorism imported within the borders of the two countries. Austria-Hungary, in that Bosnia was a possession of Austria, and of course 9/11. The difference, it seems to me, is that Austria would not have gone to war against Serbia without the unqualified support of the German Kaiser, the infamous blank check that he offered. And consequently, I see a difference between that situation and the situation here, where the United States was, with British support, of course, the leader in going to war.
The infamous blank check did exist, you're absolutely right. But there was another one. Serbia knew that they had a blank check from Russia. Total support. And Russia did act very quickly. Remember that Russia was the first, after the Serbian-Austrian War, to declare war, in that case to Austria. Germany did not. Germany was supportive of Austria, there's no doubt about that, but there's a famous moment when Kaiser Wilhelm II, reading the last proposition of an answer from Serbia to Austria, said, peace is saved for this generation, let me go and have a holiday, and he disappeared on his yacht in the Baltic Sea for a month without the radio, you see. But he, at the time, was very supportive of Austria, but his mind was not yet set about going to war. It took Russia. So I would say you had blame, at the conclusion, you had blames on every side. It is also true that the French wanted Alsace-Lorraine back and were looking for an occasion, you see. So there was some fault in on every side.
But also there was a plan in place, as you know, to attack France first because Russia was going to take a while to mobilize, and that had been around since von Schlieffen.
You can always blame the Germans for being over-organized. See, I have a very good story about that, which is something I loved reading in the French press recently. Some journalist had a wonderful idea of going to research for a French woman married in Germany with a family, and a German woman married in France in the same situation, and interviewed them about their experience. The German woman said, well, I'm a very happily married woman and I love living in France. And one thing that really charmed me in France from the beginning, from day one, was the art of conversation. The French really had a knack at getting into fantastic arguments in which there is no taboo subject. You can talk about everything. The argument can get very heated without really getting angry. However, after a few years, I start wondering, considering the time and energy that the French spend on discussing problems, suppose they were spending the same time and energy on actually solving them. Yes, she made a hit. Now, the French woman in Germany was saying something different. She said, the first time I visited my future German family, the German family was determined to make of my visit a success. They had made a tremendous effort to organize 1 week of visit in which I was going to meet the whole family. There would be a picnic occasion. We would visit the local museum. We would go to a local concert, etc., etc. The result being that for that week, I didn't have one moment free in my agenda. And after all, if I came here, it was because I was in love with a man, and I did want some time and some unpredictability in my agenda with him. You see, the Germans do have a tendency to over-organize things. Those two criticisms are eternal, except that the animosity has disappeared, you see. So every country has its own characteristics, mentalities, etc. The question are the prejudice that they are going to feed or the will to get together. Nigel, your turn. Well, the Germans, all I can say that the Germans know it. They talk about it. It is an issue. And I will expect that they will do something about it. One thing which I liked notably in Germany during the last 5 years is that it seems to me that the pride of being German and the optimism about the future has changed a lot, and that they expect to see more and more young Germans considering a bright future, and I think this would change their attitude. But it also needs some help from the institutions. Maybe one last question, and then I will conclude, because time is running late. Please go ahead.
You mentioned the assimilation of Islam into the European culture, which is much more heavy than it is here in the United States, obviously. What do you foresee a backlash, if you will? When I lived in Germany, there was a tremendous backlash against Turkish immigrants at the time, which Germany received a lot of very bad press for. There was a lot of negative attention. So a lot of Germans, I know, are very sensitive to, nationalist ideas or things like that, which is why when the citizenship test came out and things like that, there was a little bit of controversy. Do you foresee Europe as terrorist attacks here in the United States have dropped so dramatically, especially from Middle Eastern sources, and now you see a rise in European attacks? Do you see a backlash or foresee a backlash from Europe into the, I guess, Islamic penetration into their society?
You always have a certain amount of xenophobia which goes up and down and can reach some violent levels. I lived in France in the days of the Algerian War, when we had an amount of terrorism right in Paris, which was really scary, at a much higher level than anything we have seen since. The Italians would tell you that they remember in the 70s and 80s about the red terrorism, which was absolutely dramatic. at this moment there is terrorism, I don't think it has reached any alarming level. And I would tell you in a very volunteer position, I would say that problem must be solved, just in the same way that in the US you have a series of problems at a given time that must be solved. It's a question of general attitude. Well, I would suggest to conclude because we are running out of time. I would like to conclude on those two pictures showing François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl hand in hand honoring the dead of World War I in Verdun with a view of the Douaumont cemetery and ossuary in the background. I personally found here a good illustration of what Jean Monnet and Konrad Adenauer had started in 1950, a moral pact and a will to get together and pass over all the differences, whatever happens. I would like here to make a prediction. I would expect that 50 years from now, in Jerusalem, you will have a monument of that kind, honoring all the dead in the Middle East since 1948. And on front of the monument, standing high, you will have the flag of Israel, the flag of Lebanon, and the flag of Palestine. And a man will be showing that to his kid, and the kid will ask, what was it exactly that they were fighting for? And the father can answer, well, they didn't fight about racial issues because they were all white Semites that originated in the region. They all agreed that there is only one God in which they believed. God, the compassionate, the merciful, some of them would add. They all agreed that the first man that opened a dialogue with God was Abraham, who lived a little more than 4,000 years ago, according to their creed, and they consider him as their spiritual grandfather. And they all agreed that 2,000 years ago there was a great prophet called Jesus Christ. And here was where they were beginning to disagree. Some of them said Jesus was more than a prophet. He was the Son of God. He was God made man so that man would become one with God. And his coming was predicted in the old book. He was the Messiah. Some would say Jesus was a great prophet, but he was not the Messiah. The Messiah is still to come. And some would say Jesus was a great prophet, but the greatest prophet came later. It was Muhammad. He was the first that finally got verbatim God's word and put it in a book. And Muhammad said that there is no Messiah. And the kid would say, you mean that it is about that they went to war? Well, because of that difference in creed, it translated into conflicts about territories, you see, which territory would correspond to each creed. And the kid would say, my, how stupid they were. And any European passing by would say, don't believe that. In Europe, we did even worse. We did worse between Christians. We treated the Jews and other minorities far worse than ever in the Middle East. And there are other cases, many, many places elsewhere in the world. But you can learn a lesson, and this is what I will conclude on, which is the lesson from Germany for that little kid. Human dignity is not negotiable. Never mind if upholding it costs a little more taxes. Never allow an elected government the expediency of rule by decree, nor any infringement to the rule of law. Beware any crowd shouting, God is with us. It's false, it's wrong, and it's very dangerous. War creates problems, not solutions, for the winner, for the loser, and for the others. More economic growth doesn't solve everything. Better education eventually does if it leads to widespread knowledge away from prejudices and preconceived ideas. Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market will not save our planet, and we have only one. Never let government or church or any other collective do the thinking for you. Always think by yourself. Express dissent when necessary, and stick to your own convictions. But first, that no conviction is worth the life of one innocent child anywhere in the world. And before we decide that we disagree, let's have another beer. And I will continue that. Before we part, just one last word. I would like to thank again Alliance Française, the Goethe Institute and their team, and I would like to invite you to give a big hand to Catherine Masseron, who has especially organized this event tonight. So bravo to Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Teissier-du Cros. I think we learned a lot. And
Did you?
I did indeed. I did indeed. And I never heard German history portrayed in such a positive and wonderful way. Did you know that the interpretation of the colors of our flag are black for the bleak past,
Yes.
red for the spilled blood of the unsuccessful revolution, and gold for the hope of a golden future?
Which happens eventually.
Which will happen
is why
eventually.
we can be optimistic.
Exactly. Please join us in some nice light snacks and drinks.
That's a good idea.
Thank you.
That's a good idea.